We all know the 4 occupation zones of Germany, with the help of which the 4 main victorious powers, USA, Soviet Union, Great Britain and France, divided the whole of Germany among themselves after the Second World War. This was to ensure that the war would never start from Germany again and that it would be weakened in the long run. The same was true for Austria, which was also divided between the Allies. But as we know, the Second World War did not only take place in Europe. The Japanese Empire acted in the brutal Pacific War, in which it was able to conquer a large part of East Asia. It fought a fierce battle against the Allies, and there the Second World War lasted even longer than in Europe, and it could only be ended with the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs. But why was Japan not divided into occupation zones just like Germany? Why was the country treated relatively laxly compared to Germany, and why was it able to regain state sovereignty so quickly? We look at all of these questions in today's video. Enjoy! While May 8 is considered the end of World War in Europe, the war in East Asia raged more bitterly than ever in the spring of 1945. But the same allies were not fighting there as in Europe. The main opponents of the Japanese Empire were China, the US and the United Kingdom, with the help of Australia and New Zealand. As we can see, one of the main allies, the Soviet Union, is missing here. The latter was not prepared for a war on 2 fronts, so all forces in Europe were combined and a neutrality pact was negotiated with Japan in 1941. This was especially a thorn in the side of the United States, which vehemently urged the Soviet Union to open a second war front in East Asia to relieve the US forces. But Stalin remained stubborn and he only promised to enter the Pacific War 3 months after victory over Nazi Germany. And this is exactly what happened in the end. On August 8, 1945, exactly 3 months after the end of the war in Europe, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. But the initial situation had changed in the meantime. The Americans had already done much of the work and pushed the Japanese far back. And a new wonder weapon had just been completed, the first atomic bomb. In addition, the difficulty of reconciling the interests of the Western Allies and the Soviet Union was already becoming apparent in occupied Germany, and the Cold War was brewing. So in August 1945, the Americans were not at all pleased about the Soviet Union's entry into the war, because it was clear that sooner or later they too would want a piece of Japan, and the division into occupation zones could open up a new front in the Cold War. Many historians today argue that this could also have been a reason for the rapid dropping of the atomic bombs. After all, these were dropped on August 6 and August 9, just before and just after the Soviet Union entered the war. This allowed the Japanese to be quickly brought to their knees, and less than a month later, Japan's surrender was signed. During that time, the Soviet Union was not able to achieve any significant victories, and thus played only a minor role in the subsequent peace negotiations. Thus, the USA, with the help of the British, occupied Japan after the war, and the Soviet Union was given only a rather insignificant supervisory role within the Far Eastern Commission. This was, by the way, the first time in Japan's modern history that it was occupied by a foreign power. But the occupation was not to last too long, and it was not nearly as extensive as in Germany. Neither did the US interfere in the civil administration or society of the country, nor were there such strict occupation regulations as in Germany. Even the Japanese emperor was allowed to remain in office. Of course, the emperor still had to agree to the constitution dictated by the US, and Japan also had regulations on disarmament. But the occupation of the island nation can hardly be compared to the occupation of Germany. This was mainly due to the fact that the US had learned from its mistakes in Germany and wanted to rebuild Japan as quickly as possible to use it as a bulwark in the Cold War. Time was also pressing, as the first major battle of the Cold War had already begun in 1950 with the Korean War. Japan regained full sovereignty through the San Francisco Peace Treaty signed on September 8, 1951. As a condition, however, the US-Japan Security Treaty had to be signed, authorizing the US to occupy tens of thousands of troops and establish military bases throughout the country. However, Japan quickly got back on its feet as a result of the peace treaty, and it developed into one of the largest economic powers in the following decades. But the disadvantage was that the Second World War was not dealt with at all in Japan, and to this day it is a difficult topic that people are reluctant to talk about. But the lack of occupation zones, however, prevented a fiasco like that in Germany, which was divided for decades and where differences between East and West still exist to some extent today. So if you enjoyed this video, I also recommend you my last video where I talked about why Switzerland was not attacked by Germany in World War II. Just click here and see you there.